Let's talk about different myths and misconceptions that people have about dogs, owning a dog, training a dog. I actually have a little assistant today. You might see her at some point. If you hear some snoring or shuffling in the background, that's her. And before we go into those myths, I have to say that it's going to be a 3-part series, and this is a part 1. And if you want to see the part 2 and part 3, check the links in the description. Okay, let's start with the first one. The first one I call "it is what it is." So people say like, "Oh, my dog doesn't like when I cut their nails, so I don't cut their nails." Or my dog doesn't like going in a car, so I don't take them anywhere. Or my dog doesn't like people, dogs, going for a walk, so I just don't take them. And this is a very harmful misconception because we assume that if the dog has a certain issue, this is something that we can't change. And people don't even try, or they tried some advice from internet or from somebody else. It didn't work. They're like, yeah, I told you, it doesn't work. I often, for example, hear people saying like, oh, like I can't train my dog is not food motivated. And the more I work with clients' dogs, I yet have to see the dog that is not food motivated. Most probably, it's not that the dog is not food motivated. The dog is probably so anxious, so nervous, so afraid that of course they don't take food. But if we change the circumstance, if we help the dog to be more comfortable, they will take treats for training. The same if the dog doesn't want to go anywhere, doesn't want to go for a walk, and we're like, okay, my dog just hates to go outside. If we do a proper training and we change how the dog feels about the outside world, the dog would become a dog who enjoys walking. Very often the dogs don't do something, either if they have bad experience in the past, or they just have a lack of experience, so they don't understand what it is, and they just need to get used to it. And sometimes it takes a certain training approach to get them used to something. So if the dog is terrified of a car, here comes the assistant. Okay, for example, some dogs are afraid to stay alone. The dog gonna start crying, whining, scratching, stuff like this. So you might think like, oh yeah, this is the type of dog they just don't like to be alone. But even in those cases, with certain training, unfortunately, this training takes several months, sometimes several weeks, if you're lucky. But if there's a proper training, you can actually teach the dog to be comfortable when left alone. For example, this particular assistant dog doesn't like to stay alone. As soon as you leave her in a room and close the door behind you, she starts crying. She starts like asking you to come back. She follows you from room to room. So if you get up from one chair, go to another room, or get up from a couch, go to the kitchen, she's going to follow you. Velcro dog that just likes to follow you. But if you do some training, you can actually train the dog to be comfortable when separated from you, to be comfortable when left alone. It will require a very gradual desensitization. It will require a certain training. Unfortunately, if you go Google some advice might be helpful, some advice might be absolutely bullshit advice, or some advice just doesn't fit your particular case because you have multiple things going on. If you try this advice, it doesn't work, unfortunately, you're just going to be reinforced thinking like, oh yeah, I just knew that's what my dog is. And we have to understand, of course, our dogs have the same like humans. They have some certain temperament. For example, if my dog is very like human selective, I will never make it very social and friendly dog. But I can help the dog who is afraid of people, who avoids people, to feel comfortable around people. This dog will never be super excited to hang out with people, but at least they will be comfortable. The second myth, it's surrounding the age of the dog that can or cannot be trained. There are actually two different sides of it. Some people say like, oh, don't train a puppy, wait until they get a little bit older and then you train them. And this is mostly old school advice. I think people don't follow it anymore, but some people still believe that you need to wait a certain age to train the dog. And there is the other side of this advice when people say like, oh, my dog is too old to be trained. Oh, my dog is not a puppy anymore. I can't do anything. Trust me, you can train any dog. You can train a puppy who is 6 weeks old. You can train a dog who is 6 years old. You can even train a dog who is 12 years old. Of course, there will be a difference in the approach. For example, when I'm training a puppy, I know that certain things I should not be expecting from a puppy. For example, puppies, they have very short attention span. They get easily excitable. They easily like lose interest in training. So if I train my puppy in order for them to sit still for like, 10 minutes, it's not going to work because puppies should be not expected to sit still for 10 minutes. But I can slowly build this skill. Maybe I will ask the puppy to sit still for 1 second, then for 5 seconds, then maybe the next day for 10 seconds, and so on. Also, I can, help the puppy to get this skill. For example, I will train in a bathroom where there is no other distractions. And then I will slowly go into a little bit more difficult room. Let's say I go to the bedroom, and then after I trained it in the bedroom, maybe I go train it in the living room. And then after I trained it in the living room, maybe I'll go outside and train some like in a quiet street. The same when I deal with the older dog. Let's say if I have a 6-year-old dog who pulls on leash. Of course, if dog was reinforced for pulling or was allowed to pull on leash for 6 years, it will take time to change this habit. Because first I will have to understand why the dog is pulling. Oftentimes the dogs are pulling because they get over overexcited. Let's say they sit at home all day and then you finally take them for a short walk. So they only get a limited time of when they're outside of the house. So they get extremely excited to see new things, so they start pulling. Or there is another thing when dogs pull because they trained you that if they pull you towards something, you're going to walk faster. And this behavior was so successful for 6 years. So when one day we tell our dog, okay, today if you pull me, you're not going to get there. The dog will be like, wait a minute, it worked for 6 years. Maybe I just pull harder. Your dog going to pull harder and harder and harder because they're going to be like, wait a minute, it worked. I just need to try harder. And at this point, the owner will probably say like, oh, I told you, it just doesn't work. My dog is just the dog who pulls all the time. So in this case, again, we need a more complex approach. We need to understand why the dog is pulling, what's the emotional state, are they calm when they're outside, or they're very excitable, what other past experiences contributed to the dog learning to pull so hard and stuff like this. When we're training the extremely old dog, obviously when we're doing a certain training, we have to understand what's the mental capacity, because some dogs can have a cognitive decline, they can lose eyesight, or stuff like that. So of course this is going to impede the training process. So we'll probably have to do some adjustments. We'll probably have to be more patient with the dog. To learn a new skill will probably take longer time, but it still can be done. I know you're uncomfortable because it's not enough space for two of us, because somebody is too chunky. So to summarize this, any dog can be trained. If you are thinking about training a puppy, you can train puppy as soon as they get in your house. Obviously there are things that are appropriate to train in early age, things that are not appropriate. The same like if you have a kid, we don't start to teach them like some complicated statistics or mathematical models. We start with ABC, we start 1 + 1 and stuff like this. The same with dogs. There is a certain thing, a certain skill the dog can learn based on their age. The myth number 3 about dogs knowing what's wrong, what's right, and if they choose to do something wrong, they feel guilty afterward. Unfortunately, this is a misconception. If you ever thought that, oh, my dog knows they were not supposed to do it, but they still did it and now they feel bad about it and they look very guilty, just know that this is not true. I know you're probably listening to me right now, or you're trying to turn away this video and saying like, oh, what is she talking about? I know for a fact that my dog feels guilty at times. But unfortunately, when we talk about animals, we can't apply the same concepts from our human world to the dog or animal world. There is no such a thing as moral. Like, for example, when an animal chases another animal and then kills them and eats them, because they need food, they don't live in a construct of, oh, this is moral, this is immoral, should I do this, should I not do it, am I a bad animal or a good animal? There is no such a concept. This is absolutely human only, because we can talk, we can interact, we can shame each other into certain things. We live by the man-made rules, not by the nature rules, but some like rules that are described in some books or in some laws or in some, ethical concepts. But dogs exist outside of ethics. When they do something, they don't understand what's wrong, what's right in a moral, sense of things. They do things because they want something. Let's say if my dog wants to eat, they're gonna feel like, oh, I'm hungry now, let's go find some food. They go in the kitchen, they find something on the counter, they eat it. If they are still hungry, I take the dog on a walk, they find a piece of sandwich on the ground, they eat it because they're hungry. And if I start yelling at my dog, like, what did you just do? Why would you eat this sandwich? It's so disgusting. And my dog looks at me like this. Oh my God, she's yelling at me. It's not that they feel guilty, but they can hear the way how we talk, interact to them, that we are mad, that we're angry with them. And they're like, oh, please don't do anything to me. What did I do now? What did I do wrong? The dogs are just showing appeasement behavior, but they don't think like, don't be mad at me because I ate that sandwich on the walk. They think just, you are yelling at me, you're angry, you're trying to hurt me, you're probably gonna spank me or punish me or correct me or do something else. Please don't do it. I'm showing my cute face to you, so you don't do anything. So this is very instinctual to dogs. This is what they do as a puppies, and when they're adults, if they want to make you not mad with them, they would just show this appeasement, cuteness, infantile, childish, puppish behavior. So they don't understand what they did wrong. They just understand that you're angry with them. At the same time, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, oh, if it's normal for a dog when they're hungry, just go eat garbage on the street or jump on the counter and grab some food, so should I just let them do it? That's what sometimes people feel like positive trainers allow dogs to do anything. That's not true. So in order for us to have a dog who doesn't steal food from the counter, who doesn't, do other things, we need to teach them rules. We need to spend time on training or just in everyday life explaining the boundaries. For example, I can either train, and there are certain like protocols how to teach the dog that if you see any food, this is not for you. The only food that is for you is the one that I actively gave to you and or told you, okay, you're okay to eat it. So the dogs understand like, okay, when I'm seeing any edible items, I should ask my pet guardian for advice, should I eat it or not. Again, this is not in a moral standpoint. This is just a purely learned behavior. So they used to have a behavior, see food, grab it. Now they were trained to see food, wait until you're either given this food. If you're not given, then it's okay too. Don't go crazy about it. And this is actually the reason why punishment in certain things doesn't really work. So if you punish the dog for stealing something from the counter, let's say you came home, you saw that your dog grabbed a bag of chips from the table, ripped it apart and ate the whole thing. And you start yelling at them, maybe punishing them physically. And the dog looks very upset. And you think like, oh, this dog knows that they were not supposed to take those chips. Again, if you punish the dog would not connect these things. The dog would not think like, oh, they're angry with me now because 3 hours ago I ate those chips. In reality, what you're going to teach your dog that my pet parent is just unstable person who just gets angry for no reason, and I probably better should stay away from them. And then when you start, taking your dog off leash somewhere in the park and the dog doesn't come to you and you're like wondering why the dog doesn't come to me anymore, because they know you're an angry person and they're like, oh, I just better stay away from that crazy bitch. And here is a quick experiment. My dog was just laying down, chilling, and I decided to scold her. That's experiment. I was just saying, what did you do? Why did you do that? So I just acted like I'm angry with her, like I actually did something. And look at her. She's showing me that cute behavior that as if she's guilty, but she didn't do anything. So this is the proof. It's the way how you talk to the dog in the moment, the way how you look at them, the way how your body posture looks like, the tone of your voice. That's what makes the dog want to show you cute behavior, not the guilt, because the guilt doesn't exist in animals. At least we don't have any scientific proof to it. And when you deal with puppies especially visible in terms of showing this, cute behavior, and also they're very, prone to do things that we don't want them to do. So if you have a puppy, instead of getting upset with your dog or thinking like, oh, they're so bad, they know they're not supposed to do it, but they do it, just teach them what's appropriate in your home. Be very strict about rules. So, for example, if you're eating at the table and your dog is jumping at the table trying to lick the table or grab something, make sure that you either, block their access to the table, or maybe even put them in a different room while you're eating, or do some training that they have to stay in a certain place, like in their dog bed while you're eating. So if you teach those behaviors early, you're not going to deal with the problem of, oh, my dog did something bad, now I need to punish them because they knew they were not supposed to do it. The next myth, the myth number 4, is about stubbornness, and it's a little bit comes from the previous myth. So lots of clients would tell their trainer that, unfortunately, my dog is so stubborn, I don't know how to train this thing out of them. Or my dog knows how to do this thing, but they just refuse to do it because they're so stubborn. I hear it a lot, and some of you probably even think this about your own dog. I mean, even I sometimes think this about my own dog, and then I remind myself that she's not stubborn. She's just very independent because she's a street dog that has way too much wolf and dingo in their ancestry. Just accept one simple fact, that actually 2 facts. Fact number 1, that you probably did not finish training. So you started learning this behavior, but you didn't make it solid. But in order for a behavior to stick, in order for the dog to display this behavior in any circumstance, in any situation, you need to train it in different environments. Another very common thing I saw, for example, I used to work in a pet shop, and people would line up at the cash register and they would ask their dog, sit, sit, sit. And then they would feel embarrassed and they would tell me like, she knows how to sit. I don't know why she's refusing to do it now. And I can feel for those people. It's very embarrassing when you think you train something and then your dog doesn't do it. But again, it's not those people's fault. It's not the dog's fault. It's just when the dog is in a pet shop, there are so many smells. It smells like food. It smells like treats. It smells like other dogs. It smells like other humans. It smells like so many different things that dogs are so overwhelmed. It's like bringing a kid to the Disneyland and then ask them, sit still. I told you sit still. So the same for the dog. Actually, even worse for the dog because they don't have much of a willpower. When they see things, they just want to go explore, and it's so unnatural for them to sit still. Also, sometimes dogs refuse to sit in certain places and actually pay attention to that. Let's say it's a winter time and the floor is very cold. Most dogs would not want to sit. Or sometimes the floor is very slippery and you would even notice how the dog sits and then their paws start getting apart. It's super uncomfortable. The dogs would refuse to sit in uncomfortable places. Or sometimes if it's on a walk, the dog is a little bit timid, a little bit nervous to be outside, and you ask them to sit. Of course, they're going to refuse to sit because they want to be on their feet, in case if something happens and you need to flight or fight. You have to understand, you need to train these behaviors in different situations. You need to spend a long time reinforcing this behavior, reinforcing to the point that you just say it and the dog immediately does it within like 1 or 2 seconds. Then you can slowly start wean out the treats. But if you did like 2 sessions, it worked, like let's say you trained in your living room, everything was fine, and then you go outside and my dog refuses to sit because they don't want. No, you need to gradually expose them to different distractions, different places. So what I would do, I would sit the dog to sit in the house. I would do it to the point where I say sit, and look, immediately the bum goes on the floor. So I don't need to repeat it several times. I don't need to help my dog to sit down. And if my dog can successfully sit without me prompting, saying anything extra, just sit, and they're like, no. And I can go in a different rooms in my house and the dog still does it. Like let's say I ask them to sit 5 times and they sit 4 or 5 times out of 5. And then I'm gonna maybe open the, windows so the sounds from the street come in. Can my dog still sit with the distractions from outside? If I put a treat on the counter, is my dog still will be able to focus on me and sitting, or are they gonna completely lose their attention and go, try to grab the treat? If I keep a toy in my hand, can my dog still perform sitting? If I go towards the front door and put their leash on, are they still able to sit, or are they like, oh my God, going for a walk, forget about sitting? If I open the front door, and we're at the front door, so we're still in the house, but the front door is open, is my dog still able to sit? Most of the time, I bet your dog perfectly sits in the house, but as soon as you open the front door, forget about any sitting. You will not make your dog sit. So that means there's still some training to do. The more repetitions you do, the better is the reinforcement. The more situations, times of the day, different locations, different distractions you incorporate in your training, the more chance that your dog will perform this behavior anywhere. If you don't do all these little things, it's called proofing. Most probably the dog gonna, not perform the behavior. Also, if you train your dog to do something when they were 6 weeks or 6 months old, and now 10 years later you still expect them to do this thing, but you never practice it in between, it's not gonna work. For example, like I have a dog, and when she was a puppy, I trained her to bring stuff to me to retrieve. So I would toss a toy, she would go there, grab a toy, come back, and she would consistently bring things on cue. I did it when she was a puppy just for fun. I'm not a fetch person. I don't like playing fetch with dogs, so I never practiced this. And when many years later, technically 10 years later, I was like, let's see if my dog can do this. And I tossed the toy, she grabbed it, shook it, and just left it what it is. And I'm like, oh my God, but I told her to do it when she was 5 months. So again, if you don't, practice this, it will not stick. It's the same. If you learn a foreign language when you were 6-year-old, do you think at 20 years old you're going to still remember that language? No. I learned Indonesian 5 years ago, and now I can barely remember anything. Because if we don't practice, it doesn't stick. Same with dogs. And another one still comes into this like a field of stubbornness. Many people feel like, oh, my dog is too stubborn, they refuse to walk. Oh, my dog is so stubborn, they refuse to go get in a car. My dog is too stubborn, they refuse to, walk in a certain streets, they only prefer other streets. There is a big chance that your dog experiences fear, anxiety, nervousness, they're uncomfortable, they're afraid of something. Your dog refuses to do something not because they're stubborn, but they're simply afraid. They're simply uncomfortable. They simply don't like new things and stuff like this. I'm actually editing right now the video how to walk a dog who refuses to go for a walk. So if it's something you're interested, keep in touch with this channel. I will publish this video shortly, or maybe it's already published. I will leave the link in the description. Okay, we covered 4 myths. This will conclude the part 1 for this video. If you want to see part 2 and part 3, check the links in the description, and see you soon.